Good morning. My name is Art O'Leary. I'm the Secretary to the Citizens' Assembly on Biodiversity Loss. You're all so welcome this morning. Dr Aoibhinn Ní Shúilleabháin. I know how busy your lives can be, and this is an in-person meeting because I think we are getting back to gaining the richness and the intimacy of actually meeting and speaking to people again. So the format this morning is very, very simple. Our Chairperson, Dr Aoibhinn Ní Shúilleabháin, is going to make a short presentation about the Citizens' Assembly, how it works and how you might be able to engage. We'll grab a cup of coffee afterwards and a chance to have a conversation, and then we'll come back and take questions. We'll answer every single question that you might have in your minds about the Assembly process and how you might engage. It just struck me this morning that it was 10 years ago exactly this week that I stood at this podium doing exactly the same thing to the engaged stakeholders with the Convention on the Constitution, Ireland's first experiment with deliberative democracy. At the time, they all looked at me as if I had two heads, maybe even a unicorn with two heads, because no one had ever heard of citizens' assemblies or this entire process. But I think in the 10 years that Ireland has been doing this, and we are an international leader in this. People come from all over the world to look at how we do citizens' assemblies because it has literally changed the way that we live our lives. It has delivered constitutional change, marriage equality, the 8th Amendment, the Climate Action Plan, and a whole series of things. So people understand the power of the Citizens' Assembly process, and we are very keen to get you all in this room for this exact purpose, because you are a very powerful voice in this conversation that we're having at the moment. So every single one of you has an expertise in this subject or might be likely to be affected by some of the recommendations. So that's why we're so pleased to have you here to talk about how you might engage with the Citizens' Assembly. So without further ado, can I introduce the Chairperson of the Citizens' Assembly, Dr Aoibhinn Ní Shúilleabháin.
Morning, everyone. As Art said, we're very grateful to you for your time to be here with us this morning. We're really embarking on the work, and we want to make sure that as many people are involved with the Citizens' Assembly on Biodiversity Loss as possible. So thank you for being here with us today. So I'm going to start out at the very beginning. Why? Because when I got the unexpected invitation to chair the Citizens' Assembly, this is where I had to go. What exactly is it that we are embarking on? So with this, as Art mentioned, it's an instrument of deliberative democracy, or in other places they call it deliberative mini-public. And it was designed to help regular, everyday people, and I mean absolutely no disrespect to members by saying that, but people who are ordinarily not policymakers or ordinarily not involved in decision making, to involve them in that process, to help them deliberate. And I think that is a really key word in this. It's deliberation on public policy issues. It's been increasingly used worldwide, and I was very surprised to read in an OECD report from last year that there have been 600 citizens' assemblies in the past 4 decades, 80 in the past 2 years. So this is really something that countries around the world are using more and more in order to strengthen democracy and really try and bring people into the conversations in politics. They began in the 1980s, but first widely recognised example was in 2004 in British Columbia, Canada, which was to propose a new electoral system for the province. And surprisingly, what came up in that Citizens' Assembly actually didn't go through because they required a 60% majority and they just got 59. So it in and of itself, the fact that the whole process is democratic, I think actually is something to be celebrated. So even though change isn't always forthcoming, it's representative. Why is it important? Well, as somebody who has absolutely no experience in political science, my area is mathematics, physics and education, and I really have been trying to just read up on these things. But the first thing that really strikes me is that it's very representative of society, and particularly the Citizens' Assemblies this year have been done differently to what has come before. So instead of going to the electoral register, which, as you all know, you're moving house, you don't necessarily keep it up to date, etc., this was just invitations were sent to 20,000 households on Post's books. The household got a letter and decided themselves who in the household might like to be a participant in a Citizens' Assembly. So 20,000 were sent, and I'm sorry, I'm going into too much details before I meant to, but it's very representative. Why? Because the 99 people, me being the 100th, it has a gender balance. It's representative in terms of the age groups according to CSO data. So we have so many 18 to 24-year-olds, so many retired people, etc. So very representative, probably more so than we might see in policy-making rooms, let's say. Delivers well-formed opinion, and I think this is key. Some people criticise the Citizens' Assembly because they're people coming together to make a decision, but they're not that. They're people who are giving up an awful lot of time to listen, to read, to engage, to deliberate, and there will probably be experts on, in our case, biodiversity loss by the end of the year, and I'd probably go to them with questions on it because they are well-informed people who are engaged in the process. And in Ireland, we've seen that it can render formerly blocked situations finally governable. It's like a politics of blame avoidance almost, if it's something that's too touchy for a government to have to deal with. I don't necessarily think it's the case in this regard, but I do think that if things need to change, it's far better to have some public opinion behind what changes might be there and why that they might recommend to a government. But I say that acknowledging all the different opinions, all the different experiences that are in that room, and all the people that we will be listening to as part of the process as well. As Art mentioned, we were the first country in the world where 4 nationwide Citizens' Assembly were held in succession. We stand out as a unique case around the world because of the major political outcomes that have come, and Art mentioned some of those there already. And they're becoming a main reference for deliberative democracy scholars, as Art mentioned. There are political scientists around the world who are referencing what happens in Ireland and will be looking on what we're doing and what the Dublin, the Citizens' Assembly and the Dublin Mayor will be doing as well. What we're doing currently in Ireland are evaluated in line with the OECD good practice principles for deliberative processes for public decision making. We are making everything transparent, and everything that we will be doing in our meetings will be live streamed as well. Ireland is building an institutional knowledge on the operational elements of the Citizens' Assembly, and we're learning every time, for example, in how we recruit people. And there's kind of becoming an Irish model of a Citizens' Assembly where we might have maybe a slightly different role of a chairperson in Ireland than might be in other places, because if you're somebody like me who really likes to get involved in the detail, the Secretariat are very patient with my control freak and where I like to know everything that's happening, and that's kind of something that can be facilitated within the Irish model. There are criticisms, partly because it's government maybe who decide all of the topics, and in other places it's actually the citizens who come up with the topics that will be dealt with by the Citizens' Assembly. But that's where we are right now. It has obviously pros and cons. What I think are the important elements of our Citizens' Assembly is that it's not connected to the interested department. So while it's the Department of Local Housing, Heritage and Local Government, sorry, my apologies. It's likely that maybe the recommendations will be let's say, most relevant to that department, but they have no connection to the running of it. And for example, if there were a Citizens' Assembly on education, it would have no connection to the Department of Education, because that would be, maybe it would include some biases within that. So it's run from the Department of An Taoiseach. There's an institutional knowledge which we are incredibly grateful for, because it's wonderful that there's a constant learning, there's a constant knowledge about what will work, what may not work, and an opportunity to trial new things like the field trip, which we did on Saturday, has never been done before with the Citizens' Assembly. There's also a really high level of public awareness and interest. I'm delighted in that. It's something that I would like to see more of, because research internationally has shown that the more public awareness there is about a Citizens' Assembly, the more likely it is that people will tune into what the recommendations are. And the assemblies are building on each other all of the time. And of course, our own findings will likely be connected to the Citizens' Assembly on Climate Action. So we've been tasked with examining how the state can improve its response to the issue of biodiversity loss and to bring forward proposals in that regard. So that is what was passed in the Oireachtas in February, and there was a very robust debate within both the Dáil and the Seanad on that. And that is the core focus of our work. And I'll go through the terms of the reference in a moment, but I want to let you know who the citizens are in this assembly. So we had our family portrait at our first in-person meeting on May 14th. We see there in Dublin Castle. The people who are sitting at the front are the steering group. These are the 6 members of the assembly who are representative of the 99 with any communication that they want to bring to myself or to the Secretariat. As I said, 20,000 letters were sent out. There were over 2,300 responses. And I think that's amazing that this many Irish people said, I'm willing to give up 10 days of my year to do this on behalf of the rest of the country. 99 were chosen as representative of Irish society based on CSO population data. So an example of that, we've got our gender split. We have 23 people from Munster, although it seems like there's far more, and it seems like they're all from Cork. Sorry, I meant to fix this. We thought there were 4 farmers. There's actually 6 farmers. We have 12, 18 to 24-year-olds, and one of them being, an 18-year-old landing up on his own, but, very willing to get involved. But you can see the shyness, but it's wonderful. And on the other end of the spectrum, a retired teacher who is living on her own and is so delighted to be part of this. And she feels like it's a tribute to her grandmother, who was also a farmer. And it's just lovely that we're really seeing a beautiful broad spectrum of Ireland represented in those 99. Our principles of operating are principles that we've taken from the very first constitutional convention that was held in Ireland: openness, fairness, equality of voice among our members, respect, efficiency and collegiality. And by that, as I said, all of our meetings, all of the presentations that we'll be hearing, they will all be live streamed and all be available to watch afterwards as well. Everybody who has opinions on our assembly will be listened to. We work in groups, in tables where there's a professional facilitator and note taker, so all feedback, all responses are recorded and collated as well. And by that, I mean as well, because as well as the farmers, we've got people who are working in data centres, we have civil engineers, we have people who are building roads. Everybody is involved in this, and everybody will have an equal say in the work that we do. My role then, as I mentioned, I am the 100th member of the Assembly. So I will have a casting vote if we are in a tie. If, for example, it's 98 people and there's a tie on the recommendations that will be voted for at the end, I will have a casting vote in that. So I'm equal to everyone else in the 99, but a little bit more equal than everyone else. And also my role is to be that kind of spokesperson between the members and our expert advisory group, who I'll introduce you to now, and the Secretariat. And I chose this image because I really feel like it's a balancing act. That's what I'm learning right now. It's trying to balance what I'm hearing from the Assembly members, what the expert advisory group are saying, what the Secretariat are saying, and it's really trying to hold all those conversations in my mind. But not only that, in the balance, what I also think is really important that whatever recommendations come about, while my role as chair is to make sure that all the Assembly members are as informed as possible to come up with the recommendations, I think it's also important that I try and facilitate that those recommendations are balanced, because if they're not, they will be unlikely to be implemented. And that's really important, that we get that balance then between society, between nature and between the economy. So I think that that's going to be really important for our work as well. So in our terms of reference, we should consider the international, European, national, regional and local dimensions to the biodiversity emergency. And this is something that we've already begun learning about. The threats presented by biodiversity loss and the opportunities to reverse this loss. So this is what the Oireachtas have charged the Citizens' Assembly with doing. What are the main drivers of biodiversity loss, their impacts and the opportunities of addressing these drivers? These are something that we have to consider in our work. What are the perspectives of the general public, the representative groups, advocacy groups, experts and policymakers on biodiversity loss and its impact in Ireland? And this is part of the reason that we are having you here today, because you are potentially representative groups, advocacy groups, experts, and as Art mentioned, perhaps maybe impacted by some of the recommendations, but we want to hear from everyone, and the way we really want to engage with as many people as possible. So there are the first 4 terms of reference. These are all available on the website, citizensassembly.ie. The 5th one, we should consider opportunities to develop greater policy coherence and strategic synergies between biodiversity policy and other policy priorities, including, but not limited to, economic development, climate action, sustainable development, agriculture and tourism. So, I mean, we could have spent the whole year, I think, just looking at this one issue of policy, but we'll have the relevant experts in to speak to us about what this means for our work. We'll also consider opportunities to promote greater understanding of and support for urgent action in response to the biodiversity emergency. And this has been coming out in so many of the conversations we've been having already. And also looking at opportunities to improve the state's response to the challenge of biodiversity loss and how that response can best be resourced and implemented in a strategic and coordinated manner, and how progress can be measured. So taking those 7 terms of reference, it's no easy tasks that are ahead of the Assembly, but part of my role will be to try and make sure that we are as educated and informed as possible on these matters, so that at the end of our process, the Assembly members will be able to come up with and vote on recommendations, and that's how the Assembly will proceed. So you might be interested in who the Expert Advisory Group are. Their role is to help us find who may address the Assembly, who are the best people, where in the world could we potentially learn from. So we have a diverse group of people here. That we have Professor Tasman Crowe of UCD, Dr Mary Dobbs Maynooth, Associate Professor Clodagh Harris from UCC, Dr James Moran from Atlantic Technological University, formerly GMIT, Professor Jenny McElwain from Trinity, and Dr Micheál Ó Cinnéide. So across this expert advisory group, we have expertise in policy, in agricultural policy, in deliberative democracy, in marine life, in botany, ecology, and then looking at kind of internal policy workings and things like that as well. So we're hoping that we're kind of ticking all the boxes of our terms of reference with our expert advisory group, and we have capacity to expand this should we feel like we're missing any elements of that. So the structure of our meetings, so far we had our first in-person meeting on the 14th of May. And really in that one, we looked at, well, what's the problem of biodiversity loss and what have we got to lose if we lose biodiversity? That was our initial kind of outlay. We had a presentation from Professor Robert Watson, who was chair of an IPCC group on biodiversity and climate change. And then we had our field trip, what does biodiversity loss and protection look like, with example sites. And then over the autumn, we'll have 4 full weekends. We'll be listening to research scientists, public officers, volunteer groups, advocates and stakeholders. And in this, we hope that some of you that are in the room today will be able to come in and join in these conversations. And we'll be able to do that if you can engage with us in our submissions. And I'll talk to you about that in a minute. We will then make recommendations based on the information that we hear, and we'll bring those recommendations to government. We're already getting criticisms from all spectrums on this debate, which is a good thing, I think, you know. So we have people saying, oh, you're only looking at the good news stories, and, you know, you're not seeing the bad picture. And then, you know, other people are saying, oh, this is going to be terrible for economic prospects, etc. So it's great. I'm delighted with this debate. I'll try not to take it personally, because really our work is only beginning right now. We do want to hear from as many people as possible. There will also be a Children and Young People's Assembly running in tandem with this Adult Citizens Assembly, and the purpose for that is to try and get an intergenerational dialogue. The Citizens Assembly can only involve people who are over 18, but as we all know, it's the under 18s who are generally most vocal and quite active in this whole area of climate change and biodiversity loss, and they're the ones that will be impacted most. So this will be running concurrently. They're currently recruiting a Children and Young People's Advisory team. Their assembly will involve 8 to 17-year-olds, and we are hoping to incorporate them into our discussions later in the autumn. So why have we invited you here today? Well, as Art said, this is building on other citizens' assemblies. We want to have as broad an engagement as possible with the work of this assembly. So we are inviting submissions from individuals and interested groups and stakeholders, companies, anybody. If you're a member of a tidy town association, if you're worried about the wildlife in your estate, or if you run a large farm, this should be of interest to you, and we'd like to hear from you. So if you can go to citizensassembly.ie, you can be in any form as possible. We're already getting queries. Can we have a song? Can we put through a song? Can we incorporate a video? Of course you can. The quality of your Citizens' Assembly submission will influence who and how we can bring you into the process in the autumn. All submissions will be available to view on the website. So our members will be able to view it, but so will all other members of the public. They'll be able to view the submissions. So it'll be great to see as many people as possible involved in that. And really, we want you there. We want to hear from you, because we don't want these recommendations to come out and for people to say, well, you never invited us to get involved. We are inviting you. We want to hear from you. And as I said, it'll give us the potential to invite everyone who submits to our work. My contribution as chair, and I thought this image was appropriate because it's a Lorentz attractor, which, if anyone has done mathematical physics, it's a dynamical systems kind of image that we'd know in our space, but it's similar to a butterfly as well. I know nothing about biodiversity loss, and when I got the phone call to invite me to this role, I said, I don't think I am the right person to do this because I don't know anything about it. But Art assured me that that was actually useful, because I could then not drive what we're hearing about. So I'm taking my role as chair very seriously, in that I want to make sure everybody is as informed as possible to make this. I'm hoping that somehow my background in the maths physics, where we look at dynamical systems and a perturbation at the start of a system can really impact what happens later, and I'm finding some parallels, I think, in the ecological world on that. I'm also hoping my background as a secondary school teacher and a teacher educator might incorporate something into the public engagement space where I feel most happy with, but otherwise we'll be guided by the science, we'll be guided by the data, and we'll be guided by trying to get that balance that I spoke about earlier on as well. I'm also coming from rural Ireland. I come from a small, tiny townland where it's one church, 2 pubs, and a little shop. And 7 of my uncles are farmers. We're also fisher people. We hunted when there was game around. And I'm coming with all of this in the knowledge that some people are going to take what we might hear about very personally, because this is very relevant to everyone's lives. But it's, again, what's the science telling us, and what's a balanced way of helping to ensure that we can manage biodiversity loss across the country. So thank you all for attending today. This image, which you can't see very well, is actually from Dogs Bay, which I only learned on our field trip. Looks the way it looks due to erosion and too many people having walked on the dunes, and that's why it's actually a beautiful beach. But I didn't realise it's beautiful in my eyes because it's so damaged. And these are part of the stories that we actually need to learn about and we need to hear more of. And I think that telling the stories from all perspectives, not just, the people who are trying to overtly, curb things, but from all aspects. Telling the story is going to be so important. Somewhere that's very close to my heart is Lough Carra, where we fished and played as children all of the time, and now it's just been funded by the EU Life Project to bring the fish back into it, which is just something that's very heartwarming. And on the top here, it's a very bad picture of the walkway down to our boathouse, where it was covered with rhododendron, and it was a beautiful kind of fairy tale part of my childhood. And my dad tore out all the rhododendrons, and I didn't speak to him for weeks because he didn't tell us he was going to do it. And it was only afterwards that I realised his intention to do that is because it's an invasive species, and he really wants to bring back the native trees. But it's personal, And there's going to be so many personal stories about this because we take our nature very seriously in Ireland. So I think telling the stories from your perspectives in your submissions will be hugely important. So thank you again for coming. We're looking forward to hearing from you. We're looking forward to your questions. So Gurmíl Mágah.